Hello, you're watching me, John Nicholson, here on my YouTube channel. Thank you for joining me. I thought we'd touch on Nicola Sturgeon's book today. You can't have missed it. It's all over the papers, all over social media, and advance copies were sent to reviewers. I did not get an advance copy, so I'm furiously reading it at the moment myself. Needless to say, I went straight to the index to find out if I was mentioned, and I am, but not at any great length, which is unsurprising. I don't really know Nicola Sturgeon that well, though I've met her lots and lots of times, and it's interesting. I'm about halfway through the book, and it's interesting reading from her how very shy she is, because that was always my impression of her. She conveys this mastery of her brief, and she is masterful in dealing with her briefs. She's obviously clever. She can be very funny in public. She's great with kids. I went on a few campaigning trips with her, and kids would congregate towards her, and she'd be absolutely brilliant with the kids. But if you were ever in a room with her, just the two of you, conversation wasn't easy. Somebody once said, I think a journalist, there was no silence quite as deep as a Nicola Sturgeon silence, and I noticed that a few times myself. I met her during the independence referendum, and then in the aftermath, when I was invited to tour with her on her tour of Scotland. I don't know if you remember that, but these huge stadiums where she would give speeches to vast crowds. She was like a rock star. She sold out a huge stadium in Glasgow within days, faster than Beyonce, people said at the time. Sold out. She didn't charge for the tickets, but tickets were allocated very, very quickly. And I was the master of ceremonies. I had to go out from behind the curtain and, with no running order, introduce each of the build-up acts, including Alex Salmond, and then on to Nicola herself. There was pop stars, there was film stars, there was actors, stage actors, musicians, and then Nicola Sturgeon herself. And she gave an incredible speech and left everybody buzzing. She was party leader and then First Minister for almost a decade. Now, there's been controversy about Nicola Sturgeon in recent years, but it's worth remembering that when she left office with record approval ratings. I just checked what they were, and she left office with 46% favourability, which is very high for a politician, because inevitably there's going to be lots of people who oppose you because of your politics or your personality. And just to put that in contrast, the leader of the Labour Party, his popularity rating, Anas Sarwar, was 26%. And the woeful, disastrous leader of the Conservative Party, a man called Douglas Ross, was down at 13%. So she strode over the body politic in Scotland and was famous, not just in Scotland, but throughout the United Kingdom and across much of the world. She was a recognisable figure. Everybody remembers how she guided us through the pandemic. Down in London, there was Boris Johnson holding his illegal parties, and up in Edinburgh, there was Nicola Sturgeon giving daily briefings. She was an industrious, committed First Minister, and she must have been exhausted at the end of the COVID pandemic, taking the decisions that she had to take. And we saw that when she gave evidence to the COVID inquiry, when uncharacteristically she started to cry in public about the heavy burden that had been placed on her shoulders throughout. And people, whether they were her supporters or not, almost universally praised the dedicated way in which she conducted the COVID briefings and took decisions on behalf of the country to save people's lives. And of course, the powers that she had were limited, because in New Zealand, for example, they could close the borders. But Scotland, we don't control our own borders in Scotland. So flights can come in from elsewhere in the world, and the First Minister of Scotland has no control over that. People can drive, at one point they could drive across the border with no control over that either. But with the limited powers that she had, I think she behaved admirably. Now, people talk about her record as well, but just to put things in context as well, in health, Scotland has the best accident and emergency response rate in the British Isles. And I know myself, having had 2 hip replacements, just how effective the Scottish National Health Service is. In education, there's free tuition for Scottish students in Scottish universities. Now, you know yourself, if you're at university, how much fees cost south of the border. In Scotland, there are no fees whatsoever. There's free prescriptions for folk as well, which of course is a huge burden off the shoulders of people who rely on medication long term. And I think she would probably say that her proudest boast was on poverty, because the Scottish Child Payment means that poverty levels amongst families with children are dropping, and it's the only part of the UK where that is happening. Her vision, I think, was of a Nordic model for Scotland, a socially progressive Scotland, like Finland or Denmark or Sweden. Higher level of taxes for the rich, and higher level of welfare for everybody. Again, without independence, it's hard to deliver that in its entirety, because the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish Government, doesn't have the powers of a fully independent state. But I know that was her vision, and to a large extent, she succeeded. Her failures are pretty obvious. The main failure, her detractors would say, who are in the yes camp, is that she failed to deliver independence for Scotland. But I've never heard anybody come up with a really insightful argument about what she could have done that she didn't do, which would have delivered independence. She certainly presided over a steady increase in support for independence, especially amongst the young. Support for independence now stands at roughly 55% in the polls. But crucially, if you look at the demographics, the only group who are now opposed to independence are the over 65s, and amongst the under 35s, support for independence is very high indeed. So I think the direction of travel is pretty obvious. Now, all the press commentators pretty much have concentrated on things that Nicola Sturgeon says in her book about her private life. She talks about her sexual orientation, which she says isn't binary. You know what? I couldn't care less about that, but that's been seized upon by lots of salacious reviewers. She also talks about the huge controversy over trans rights. Now, in the last few days, I have read the most disgusting comments on social media by trolls who hide their names and trolls who reveal their names, because Nicola Sturgeon talks very movingly about a miscarriage that she suffered and the terrible pain that it caused her and her husband. I cannot imagine a world in which people would use somebody's private pain over something so heartrending. And I know my mum suffered 2 miscarriages. I can't imagine anybody, no matter what their politics, using that to attack or mock somebody. And yet some people are doing that. And the people who are doing it tend disproportionately to be transphobes. And they're using it, I imagine, because it's the thing that they can use to attack her that's the cruelest and most hurtful thing that they can possibly think of. She earned the hatred of transphobes because she stood up for trans people. And as she's pointed out over the last couple of days, there is no conflict between women's rights and trans rights. And the Gender Recognition Act, which was passed in Parliament with all party support, with the support of the Labour Party, many Tories, the Lib Dems, the Scottish National Party government and the Greens, remember, all party support. When that legislation was passed, it was seen as a way of giving dignity to trans people. Similar legislation has been passed in many other countries, including Ireland, without controversy. But sadly in Scotland, imported culture wars from the States took root, and eventually the reform became bogged down and then rejected by Westminster, which chose to override the wishes of the Scottish Parliament. I think in a few years' time we will think how absurd the whole Sturgeon was, but in the meantime trans people are subjected to the most appalling attacks. Trans children are often in tears to their parents, and their parents in tears talking to politicians like me about the pain that the abuse causes them. So, my prediction, it's going to be a bit like the homophobia that we saw in the 80s and 90s. In a few years, the legislation will be passed. People will look back on this as a black period in our history. And on Nicola Sturgeon, I think the history books will be kind. She's an extraordinary politician. She's a brave fighter for the causes that she believes in. She's a shy person, but she's a person that represented Scotland well on the national stage and the international stage. And I hope and believe that the future is bright for her, whatever she chooses to do next. So listen, thank you for listening, and I'd be very interested in your comments. Whatever you want to say, I always do my best to answer. Please subscribe, it costs absolutely nothing, and I look forward to hearing from you.